Oh, so if the Old Testament says that something is permissible or not permissible, then that's what it is.
According to the Hebrew faith, yes.
So we're allowed to own slaves then.
Okay, what the American people defined as
There he
slavery
goes. There he goes.
and what slavery was back then, they were indentured. What you did, if you read the book of Genesis, um, his name was Jacob, and he permitted himself to be an indentured servant to Rebecca's dad for 7 years because he wanted to marry Rebecca. He gave him Leah instead, and then
Yeah,
he committed himself to
we know
another
we know the
7 years,
story. You don't
which
have
was
to.
slavery.
We all know the
Which was
story.
slavery.
We know the story better than you do, in fact. Okay, so we're not talking about indentured servants. We're talking about actual slaves. It says in
Those are
Leviticus
slaves.
25, as for your male and female slaves who you may have, it is from the nations around you that nations around you, from them you may buy male and female slaves. Moreover, you may buy the children of strangers who dwell among you and their families who are with you, which they beget in your land, and they shall become your property. And you shall make them as an inheritance for your children, you will take them as an inheritance for your children after you, for them to inherit them as a possession, and they will be your permanent slaves.
Yeah, and
Forever.
it goes into the treatment of those people.
Oh,
It
hold
says
on,
that you shall not mistreat
David.
them.
David, you're moving the goalpost, and you're lying again. So right now, it doesn't say indentured servants. It doesn't say for 6 years go free in the seventh. It says they are your permanent slaves. Do you agree?
I agree.
Okay, so you could have slaves permanently.
You could.
Fantastic. I'm glad we can come. Okay, so God does condone slavery. Do you think that slavery's wrong?
In that sense, it was not wrong because he also goes over the treatment of those
Okay, so
possessions.
slavery
You
is
can't mistreat
okay as
them.
long as you treat your slaves kindly.
Exactly.
Okay, should you be allowed to beat your slaves?
No. Because
Okay,
it says that in Leviticus as well. You can't.
Do
yeah,
you think
he hasn't
the
read it.
problem with American slavery was that they just didn't treat their slaves well enough?
They didn't treat them well at all. What do you mean?
But if they treated them better, do you think slavery would have been fine?
If they treated them according to the Hebrew law, then it would have been fine.
What?
Hebrew law says you can beat them with a rod.
If they commit a crime.
No, it didn't say that. It says if a man beats his male or female servant with a rod, and that he is unalived under his hand, he shall surely be punished.
He shall surely be punished. There you go.
Keep reading. Notwithstanding, if he remains alive for a day or two, he shall not be punished because he is his property. So, if he
He beat him with a
survives,
rod because he broke the law.
it didn't say that. Didn't say anything about breaking the law.
He didn't tie him to a post and beat the hell out of him just
How do-
because of
How
his
do you
skin color.
How do you know?
That's a difference.
Oh, the skin color is irrelevant. We're not talking about that. We're talking about owning slaves and whether or not you can beat them.
Again, Hebrew law defines slavery as different.
It says you can beat them and you can own them for life.
Okay?
That's
We
slavery.
agree.
So, what was wrong with the Atlantic slave trade?
The people who brought the slaves over were corrupt. And
So,
the people who owned the slaves here were corrupt.
Okay,
That's
so-
totally different.
so good God-fearing people can own slaves.
And treat them correctly, yes.
So you're pro-slavery then, as long as it's good people doing it.
I'm pro-slavery as long as they follow the tenets of God and they don't mistreat their slaves.
There we go.
David,
We heard it.
Do you think that you should be able to own slaves, David?
Because they feed their slaves, they take care of their slaves, they give their slaves housing,
Should you
they
be
pay
able
their
to?
slaves,
You
and they pay their
specifically.
slaves.
Should you be able to own slaves, David? You're a good Christian. You'd treat your slaves very well. Should you be able to own them?
He's talking to you.
I'm talking to you.
Oh, you talking to me? What was your
Yeah.
question? Should I? Okay,
Should
what was your
you be
question?
able to own slaves? If you treat them
wouldn't be
well,
in-
you're a good Christian. Should you be able to own slaves? You specifically. Do you want to own slaves?
I don't want to own slaves. I work for myself.
Would
So-
you be like too cruel of an owner? I'm confused. Why wouldn't you
I
want
wouldn't be
slaves?
too cruel of an owner. If the option were given to me and was able to hire help, then yes, I would. But I would treat them correctly.
You would own slaves?
I would own slaves, and I would treat them correctly.
Oh my God.
What the
And again, because the premise that America has put on it through the 400 years that they owned slaves and how they treated them, people automatically think that's the assumption of owning a slave and how slaves are treated. They automatically think it's bad. But the English, when England populated India and Northern Africa, they didn't treat them that way. They were slaves.
Well, I want to continue this, but before we do, Aaron, thank you so much for the $50 super chat. Also, Philo Dragon, big W for that, Aaron. Aaron says, your secular Bible study is the best. We appreciate you so much. I really appreciate you as well. Big W, I appreciate that.
I appreciate you too, sir. I appreciate you too.
David, are you suggesting then that slavery wasn't so bad?
The treatment of the slaves in American culture was bad. The treatment of the slaves in the West Indian and Caribbean culture was bad.
Should we be allowed to sell our daughters as slaves? Like, if I have a daughter, because Exodus says if a man sells his daughter to be a female slave, she shall not go out as the male slaves do. Obviously, she gets
correctly.
To be...
There you go. She gets to be, yes.
So we should be allowed to sell our female daughters, our children, as slaves without their consent.
That is under the Hebrew law. It is different than American law.
Okay, so we should be allowed to do it then.
Yes.
Hey, David, would you be okay with being owned as property?
I'm owned right now. You should see my job. I'm very much owned. I'm underpaid.
You're getting owned.
This is a great metaphor. We're talking about literal, like literally owned. Would you be okay with literally being legally owned?
Jesus owns me now. Yes, I would be okay with being owned.
Yeah, it doesn't go that.
Would you be my slave, David?
If you treated me right, absolutely.
Oh, dear God. Tyler, thank you for the $5. Tyler says, Christianity is an effing joke, and David is the proof. And listen, David, I love you, but you lost me at slavery is cool and that women should be executed for not being virgins. And